الله يبارك فيك علي. الله يجزيك خير. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله رب العالمين، الصلاة والسلام على محمد النبي الأمين وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. Inshallah, I wanted this evening to discuss three issues related to the events in Palestine. The first issue is this slogan that has been used by different parties from the river to the sea. What's its use? Why it's problematic now in some European countries and maybe coming in the US. The role of Iran and Qatar in the crisis in Gaza. And the last thing, the issue of the prisoners. People have questions about what and why and who. I will try to answer some of these questions. But let me start by saying that the war will continue. There is no doubt. It's unfortunate, but we will be fooling ourselves if we think otherwise. The Zionist entity will fracture, and they will have internal big problems. The only way to keep on going is to continue the war. So from this perspective, it's crystal clear that the war will continue. Will it continue at the same pace? The US is trying to put some brakes on the genocide that started a month and a half ago. And they want the Zionists to be a little more careful in killing. Basically, instead of killing 300, 400, 500 people a day, it's enough to kill 250 in this regard, half of it. So it's not that the US is crying for the civilian of Gaza. They realize that the public opinion in the US is shifting. They realize that US politicians, Republicans and Democrats, are taking position that nobody would think they will take it as of 2 months ago. This issue related to what would be the next day, and this is related to what we are discussing tonight, from the river to the sea, because this has been used, as I said, by different groups to mean and to say different things. But the fact that there are senators and congressmen who are speaking out in a way that they never did in the past is raising alarm. I'll give an example. There was a congressional vote this week on the right of Israel to exist. You say, what? You still discussing? So, this congressman from New York who voted for the right of Israel to exist, he said, why we keep bringing votes on this issue? We have other things to discuss. Why? Because there are some vicious criminal elements within the US who wants to make laws eventually that anybody who stands in this country and say something negative about Israel, that will be a crime. That's where this thing is heading. That's where this thing is heading. Because in Europe, in Germany, and France, this process already started. And look at this speech that Schumer have given for 45 minutes in the Senate. And I quote, For Jewish people all across the world, the history of our trauma going back many generations is central to any discussion about our future. I mean, you have to understand what he is saying. So he's telling the Europeans and the Americans and the rest of the colonialists that this Israel is your project because you have kicked us out of our homes, out of our money, out of our connection to the land in Europe and other places, and you put us there. He knows that this is a new colonial project. You know, in the old days, the old colonialism, where the British, the French, the Germans, even the Italians in Libya, they sent their, missionaries, and then they sent their schools, and then they sent their forces, and they colonized the bulk of the world, especially the British Empire. Now, in the 20th century, most of those colonies have attained some kind of independence. Although it's not a real independence, they still control those governments. Look at the French army in Africa until today and the fight against it in this regard. But Israel is different. This is a new form of colonialism. It's called the new colonialism. So Israel is a new colonialism project. You just need to look at this as colonialists coming and taking over Palestine. It's not different from the colonialists who went and took over South Africa from the blacks, or the colonialists who took over French in the Central African Republic, and so on and so forth. It's this colonialist mentality. So Schumer is saying, you need to take into account our history, that you caused our problem. So talking about forward, how to deal with this issue forward, is something that you need to take into account. Basically, Palestine, historic Palestine, is between the Jordanian River and the Mediterranean Sea. يعني ما بين نهر الأردن والبحر الأبيض المتوسط. The bulk of the Jews are saying this all is our land. At one point, there were voices saying basically this can be shared, because they realize they are tools in the hands of the new colonialists. And they realize that this is a lie. And they realize that this is a cancer in the heart of this Muslim Ummah of 2 billion people. How could 7 million people, at one point they were much less than that, survive in here? It's a matter of life, of time, and they know it. So basically, some of them try to come to some kind of a formula. Well, now this formula is no longer there. The bulk of the Zionists in Palestine, they just say this is our land, from the river to the sea. And when you ask them about what about the people in Palestine, you will have different answers. The most extreme among them to the right say basically people of Palestine in the West Bank, we need to kick them out to Jordan. And in Gaza, we need to send them to Egypt. And those plans are not some people in the streets saying these things. No, those are actual plans that the US government, the Israeli government, with the knowledge of the US government and the Europeans, have developed over the years. If you go to the encyclopedia and look this issue of removing the people from Gaza, you will find over the years more than 10, 12, 13 different plans. They try to push it over the years. So from their perspective, from the river to the sea means all of this is our land. And there's nothing that's called Palestinian rights or people of Palestine. Some of them even say, well, what would you mean by Palestinians? There are no Palestinians, there are no Palestine, and so on and so forth. On the other side is the people of Palestine who say from the river to the sea, all of it is Palestine that belong to the people of Palestine. And those people of Palestine are, the majority are Muslims. There were some Christians and there were some Jews living in the old days, Arab Jews. Just like the Arab Jews in Yemen and the Arab Jews in Iraq and the Arab Jews in Libya, the Arab Jews in Tunisia, and so on and so forth. So basically, you know, that's what is Palestine, and we will not accept anything less. Now, the moment the first statement coming from the Zionist, you know, nobody questioned. We have seen a few months ago this Natan, by the way, you know, in Arabic means smell, you know, something smell bad, right? That's what Natan is, you know, something that you don't want to smell. So that's what they call Netanyahu in Arabic when they said Natan, without to continue with the Yahu. So this Natan stood in the UN and raised a map, and he said, this is Israel. What was on the map? The whole of Palestine and the Golan Heights. Nobody came and said, wait a minute, what are you talking about? Yes, there were, you know, voices on the fringe that said, you know, where is the world? Why the world is not reacting to this? Now, if somebody from Palestine says, Palestine from the river to the sea, he's gonna annihilate the Jews. He's gonna kill all the Jews. He's gonna murder all the Jews. He's gonna do this. So suddenly, you know, the picture takes a different turn. No, nobody's saying, you know, kill all the Jews. Nobody's saying that. What we are saying is that this land, the colonial project, need to come to an end. And then will be up to the people in Palestine of who to accept to stay and who to go. Just like the US, you know, protect its borders. There are people that they allow them in, and there are people that we do not want them. Exactly this is what will people in Palestine are saying, that this Palestine is from the river to the sea. This whole belongs to the Ummah, and up to the Ummah to decide who will stay and who will go among the Zionists. You know, nobody's saying we you know, ought to slaughter and kill X millions of people. No. That this project need to be unfolded. The way it was built, it need to be destroyed. This project, colonial project, not the people in this. Because many who live there, basically they will tell you, I live here because it's cheap, the housing is subsidized, clean air in the West Bank. I mean, there are 850,000 settlers, colonial settlers. Those are just like the British colonialists, the French colonialists, the American colonialists in the Philippines, and so on and so forth, who live in the West Bank. And they are all over the hills of Palestine. Each city have 2 or 3 settlements next to it. So when they, you know, hear this term in this regard, they start crying to the world and saying basically those who want to kill us, you know, and going to the Europeans and crying to the Americans, and you know, we are victims, look at us, and this and this and that. You know, this whole jazz has been there for many years, from the early days of BLO. You know, there was an author by the name of Ghassan Kanafani who played a role. He was a writer and he was a thinker. He was assassinated by the Israelis, the Zionists, in the 1970s. So he had an interview with the BBC at that time. And they said, why don't you talk to the Israelis? He said, how could the neck negotiate with the knife? I mean, I know many Americans will not understand what he's talking about, but with his English, that's the way he put it. You know, this is basically a vicious enemy who's trying to slaughter all of the people of Palestine and get rid of them. And you say, negotiate with them on what? How could the knife, being on the neck, try the neck to talk to the knife and say, let's negotiate? And of course, as I said, he's among the people who refused and was rightly in seeing that this is a useless process. So when Arafat You know, in 1974, came on Time magazine and said, you know, our state will not have a religion. لن يكون لدولتنا دين. This is a Time magazine and trying to appeal to the West and start talking about a peace between the Palestinian and the Jews. Many within the ranks said, what are you talking about? They will not give you nothing. And Arafat went all the way and he got nothing. He got nothing. After all the sacrifices, after all the compromises, after all this history, they try it and they got absolutely nothing. This is what Netanyahu gave them, a map that includes all of Palestine and the Golan, saying this is ours. Basically, you have nothing. So those people were visionary and they saw where this thing is heading. Now there's a third group among the Palestinians and the Jews. When they talk about from the river to the sea, their vision is a secular state where basically the Jews, the Palestinians, and some of them says even those Palestinians who are outside, were ejected from their homeland, can come back and this land is big enough for all of us and we can live together. But of course, the Jews will not accept this because if that's the case, you know, there will be election. If there are election, and this is what Arafat, by the way, used to say. Arafat, when he realized he's not getting much and the Jews are not giving him something, so he used to give those speeches. And he said, if everything fails, the womb of the Palestinian woman will solve the problem. You know what means the womb of the Palestinian woman? Mean we're going to bring more children and we're going to take over. Even in a democratic state, we'll be the majority. So if you bring all the Palestinians, let's say the bulk of them, back to Palestine, of course you're going to have 15 million Palestinians and 7 million Jews, and you know, they would not accept it. Even without bringing the people from outside, you still have an equal number now of Jews and Palestinians. When I say Palestinians, Christians and Muslims. So that will not work. So this term now in Europe is being criminalized. That if you're going to say this in Germany or France, they are taking an issue with you, meaning, you know, what is it that you're bringing? And why this is to make the Zionist, to please the Zionist. But this term is being, you know, on the rise. And you could see some, you know, posters that says, Palestine can only take one people, either the Palestinians or the Palestinians. So basically, there's not another, you know, option that is there. So this, as far as this term is concerned. The second issue is the issue of the role of Iran in what had took place in Gaza. In the early 80s, there was a rise of two movements in Palestine. One was called Islamic Jihad, and one was called Hamas. And I explained in a different lecture that the Zionists thought that they can let the Islamic movement form and organize to be opposite to the nationalist, Arafat and his people, and they can, you know, take the lead, and eventually they thought those are, you know, people who are naive, we can take care of them. So they will take care of Arafat and his company, and we will take care of them later on. That was the idea. But what took place is the Islamic Jihad start from early on contacts with Iran. And Iran used to provide them, those who are in Gaza, those who are in Lebanon and Syria, from the bullet to the boot, to the money. So from early on, Islamic Jihad found that they need to use, you know, material struggle. So in fact, they were ahead compared with Hamas of using you know, what being called the struggle or violence or what have you against the Zionists. And Hamas was growing but much bigger in terms of numbers at that point, and without much of help from Iran. But when Hamas got to a point of seeing itself that it can claim leadership within Palestine, they realized that they have to have a source of regular, continuous, generous funding. And the only option that was available was Iran. So historically, yeah, there was some money coming from Turkey, from Qatar, to support projects in Palestine, especially Turkey in Jerusalem. Many of the Jerusalem institutions are supported by the Turkey government over the past 20 years or so, to the point that the Israelis are, calling to cut their influence in Palestine. So they have used this soft power of theirs in Palestine. But to provide weapons, that was not something that neither Turkey nor Qatar would entertain as an option. However, it was an option that Iran has offered. And whenever you hear, this criticism of Hamas and its relationship with Iran, Islamic Jihad and relationship with Iran, they have one answer to this question. Basically, this is the only source of support that we have. Nobody else is willing to support us. And that's true. Abbas is trying to finish them. In fact, there is an article in Haaretz, either today or yesterday, where this guy is saying basically the Arab regimes, especially the Gulf countries, are telling the Israelis, you need to finish Hamas. Don't stop until you finish Hamas. Of course, when they talk about Gulf countries, they are not talking about Kuwait or Qatar. They are talking about the Saudi government, the UAE government, and the Bahrain government. And Oman has been, they established a relationship early on with the Israelis, but they still allow the voices within Oman to support Palestine and the Palestinian cause. And their Mufti al-Khalili is one of the most outspoken for Palestine and against, the Zionists. But basically, the three countries led by, unfortunately, both of them name is Muhammad, and Muhammad Sarsour has nothing to do with them. Their parents called them Muhammad, but they failed. They are closer to Abu Jahl and Abu Lahab than to the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So they do not deserve those names. And as we said that in the Khatra today, that Muhammad ibn Zayed, without any ounce of shame, that even countries in Europe, like Spain and Belgium, countries in Africa, South Africa and Chad, countries in South America and Central America, Bolivia and other countries are standing and calling, some of them even threatening to cut relations. Some of them did cut the relationship with the Zionists. And Muhammad ibn Zayed challenges all of this and go and meet with the head of the Zionists in UAE today. And last week, he sent the head of the Emirates airline to meet with the Zionists in Palestine, where basically he made a commitment that the Emirates will keep flying to Tel Aviv. Although American Airlines, Delta, American, and United have, severed those flights for weeks. But this guy is more loyal to those Zionists than to his Ummah. So this Israeli journalist is saying the Arab countries, and especially those Gulf countries, are telling the Israelis, you need to continue the war and finish Hamas. I mean, this just tells you that, who is on the side of the Ummah and who is on the side of the enemy. So from this perspective, Iran and its arms in the area, from Yemen to Lebanon to Syria, you will find those voices in support of the Palestine and even some actions. We have seen the Houthis in Yemen basically saying any ship that carries an Israeli flag or owned by the Israelis, we're going to take it. And you have Israeli companies announcing that they will not go through the Suez Canal, they will do another route. Because they do not know at this moment, there were a few drones and, through missiles that get to Eilat. They do not want a side war at this point. So they are ignoring the issue of what comes from Yemen in this regard. But let's make it, clear in this regard, when, people who are thinking that Hassan Nasrallah will get to liberate Palestine, they do not know what they're talking about. For Hassan Nasrallah, it's more important to control who will be the president of Lebanon than to liberate Palestine. They have their own calculation. Lebanon has been more than a year and a half, right, or 2 years. They have no president because they could not agree, because no one has the majority in this regard. And Hezbollah, headed by Hassan Nasrallah, who are a tool of Iran, went to protect Bashar al-Assad and his regime, the Alawis in Syria. Of course, recently they start withdrawing some of this. And you know that Russia came to occupy Syria with total agreement of the US. And the aim of it was really to prevent Iran from taking over. Iran went, and without Iran and Russia, Bashar al-Assad would have been gone. No doubt about it. There's no doubt about this. So Iran came and started going through and taking control of the different angles of this Syrian society and culture. At that point, the US and Russia agreed for Russia to come to Syria and take over it, with the blessings of also Bashar, because Bashar had fear that the Iran and its stooges will eventually get rid of him. So Iran, Hezbollah, they have their own calculation. Hezbollah would not sacrifice its existence, future, prestige, influence in Lebanon for Palestine. This should be crystal clear to anyone who understands the basics of politics. Unfortunately, many people thought, just wait for the statement, wait for the what Hassan Nasrallah is going to say, and people just, hold their breath for 24 hours. And of course, as the Arab said, تمخض الجمل فولد فأرا, that the camel went into labor and gave birth to a mouse. This is exactly, and if he had remained silent, if he did shut up, that would be better for him. Absolutely. He will have still some respect among the masses, but he lost it. Big time. Big time. Now, someone is saying, but we see once in a while that there's exchange of fire. This is with total understanding between the US, the Israelis, Hezbollah, and Iran. This is limited to say here, we are keeping them busy, we are taking a stand. But everyone who knows the basics knows that if Hezbollah is to enter from the north, they have thousands of serious, fatal missiles. Hamas, the bulk of their missiles were made in Gaza with equipment coming from outside through the tunnels. They do have some real missiles, which came from Libya. When Gaddafi regime fell, some of the armament, Arab countries, by the way, they buy hundreds of billions of dollars of weapons for nothing to kill their own people. Hamas, with a few $1 million here and there, were able to achieve on October 7 what I would say more than $2 or $3 trillion of weapons that the Saudis and the Egyptians and the Syrians and etc. bought just to kill their own people, no more, no less. Now, as far as Iran is concerned, Iran is a country that think it's deprived of its position in the world. They think that we have a legacy. There was the Persian Empire. All along, we have established rules. We have established dominance in this area for thousands of years. And then we enter into Islam. We need our position back. We are a country that we need respect. How come Pakistan which is just born yesterday and less than them, the way that they see it, have nuclear weapons, and we do not. And we don't. And that's why you have seen a committee headed by Zbigniew Brzezinski about 25 years ago coming and advising the US government, let Iran have a civilian nuclear program. And then later, we can discuss the limitation in this regard. So there is no strategic difference between the US and Iran. None. The difference is Iran think that they should be the one who dominate the Gulf. Why the US is sucking the blood and the sweat of the Gulf countries and taking the oil at whatever prices that they decide, and this and this and that, and Iran is suffering under that, the pressure of the sanction and so on and so forth. So this needs to be understood very well. Now, Iran will not sacrifice itself for the future of Palestine, and this is understanding. I mean, we do understand this very, very well. They will not. If there is a war with the Israelis, each one will use its own missiles, they can annihilate each other. There's no doubt about it. And why Iran would annihilate itself? For the sake of Al-Aqsa and Palestine? Nonsense. Just like, those fools who say, oh, we're going to pray in the Masjid Al-Aqsa behind Hassan Nasrallah. Total foolishness. They do not know what they're talking about in this regard. So that's where Iran stands. Remember that at one point, Iran took the stand of kicking the Israeli influence from Iran and bringing the PLO. But later on, what we have seen is that the Israelis, the Zionists, were meeting with the Ayatollah representative in Tehran. This is, by the way, just go and Google Iran Gate. The US National Security Advisor, Israeli arms dealer, and some government related people met in Tehran with the representative Ayatollahs. All over North will take representative Ayatollahs to the White House in tours during the night. All of this is documented. All of this, just go to Iran Gate and you will see. This is, by the way, it was a big scandal. It was a big scandal. And the details of it is that the US have worked with the Zionists in arming Iran to defeat Iraq. I mean, all of this is documented in US Congress. This is not, in Arab media or somewhere. No, this is already documented. But things took a different turn later on for many reasons. One of it is that Iran wants to be a power in the Gulf. And they want, no doubt, to acquire nuclear weapons. There's no doubt about it. Although they said, the Mufti have said it's haram, and the Ayatollah said it's haram, absolute utter nonsense. So the Israelis feel that, we have people today in Iran that we can deal with. Who knows what will happen tomorrow? So that's why, Netanyahu came, allied himself with many people in the Republican Congress against Obama and tried to defeat, this agreement between the US and the other European countries and Iran. And Obama insisted on it, and it did pass until Trump came and basically ended that agreement. But there was no alternative. Iran used this period of no commitment, no inspection, and they got their enrichment close to what you need for a nuclear weapon. That's what is happening. Now, let me just close the subject of saying, yes, the money is coming from Iran, and weapons is being smuggled from Egypt. And I would say and testify that Hamas, during the time of Morsi, Allah yarhamu, they did get much weapons through the tunnels. And I will testify, even after the death of Morsi, those tunnels were still operating with the knowledge of the Egyptian intelligence. Because Egypt used to play a major role in the whole area. In the Arab and the Muslim world, Egypt was a leader. But then after Camp David with Sadat, Egypt became no longer a leader. When does the US and Europe start going to Egypt and talking to the leaders? if there's an issue with Gaza. Suddenly, oh, Egypt. Because Egypt is giving this task to who? To the Egyptian mukhabarat, intelligence. I mean, imagine, the issue dealing with the Palestinians is not done through the foreign ministry. It's done with the mukhabarat. So basically, the Hamas leaders go and meet and hug who? The head of the mukhabarat, Abbas Kamel, who is the in-law of Sisi. ذرية بعضها من بعض. Corruption. Vast. So the issue of Gaza, they go, and that's why, you heard in the beginning of this war, on October 8, after October 7, on October 8 or 9, the Associated Press published this report that the Egyptian head of intelligence, Abbas Kamel, called Netanyahu and told him in 3 days, Hamas will have an attack against you. And the office of the Prime Minister dismissed it. Now, Netanyahu said, that's a big lie. It did not happen. Only for 3 days after that, for a US congressman to say, we just came out of intelligence briefing, and the Egyptian intelligence warned the US and the Israelis from Hamas attack. So you can see they are playing both parts, to have influence inside and influence there. I mean, how shameful is it in a country like Egypt with 100 million people that they cannot get a tank of gas to Gaza without the agreement of the Zionists? How humiliating. I think there's no doubt what Hamas did and those who were with Hamas on the October 7 was much more. Even the Israelis are saying, we had nothing like this in all our history. Nothing. Because again, with a few $1 million, those people built a group of people, well-disciplined, not well-armed, well-disciplined, believe in their cause, that they were able to go knowing that they may not come back. At the time that the Israelis did not put a fight. Because as the Quran says, they love this life, no more, no less, in this regard. For the sake of time, let me spend just a few minutes on the issue of the prisoners. We have seen that almost all the prisoners that were released from the Israeli jails were people from the West Bank. If I remember correctly, and correct me, there was only one prisoner that was from Gaza. Only one prisoner. Now, half of the Palestinian prisoners that they were released, and by the way, if you look at the names, they were Muslims and Christians. There was people from Hamas, there were people from Fatah and other groups. So just look at the list and you could see it. Half of those who were released, they never charged. They were never charged, half of them. They call it administrative detention. So what it is basically is the government can come to your home, mainly they come at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, blow up the door, enter the house with guns, 10, 15, 20 of them. They search the house and then they take some young men and they keep them in jail for a month, 2, 3, 4. They renew the administrative detention for so long. So half of those who were released never charged of any crime. Remember, in the West Bank, there are 2 courts. There's the civilian court for the settlers. Colonial settlers have civilian courts. The Palestinians have what? Military courts. And rarely that one Palestinian will be considered or found not guilty of whatever, either throwing a stone or throwing something on a soldier, or the case of this Ahad, she just slapped a soldier and she ended up in jail for years in this regard. So we are not talking about serious crimes. And although those Zionists have released few hundred prisoners, from October 7 until today, they arrested 3,300 prisoners. People, and put them in prison. Again, the bulk of them, there's nothing. You cannot take them to court and says, he goes to Fajr prayer. Usually, I mean, when we go to Palestine, when there were some young men will come to Fajr prayer, the army will bring few, personal carriers, surround the masjid, and after Fajr, question all the people who are in Fajr prayer, and then take the young and go. And if you go to Palestine, in the last few years, you will not find young men neither in Fajr nor in Isha, because they know if they go, what will be the consequence. In fact, the way they pray Jum'ah is someone from this village go pray Jum'ah in a village way away from that, so that the people who are spies for the Palestinian Authority do not recognize them. That's how we pray Jum'ah. They go from village to a village, from a city to a village, nobody knows them. But Fajr and Isha, they no longer show up for that, because that's how the Palestinian Authority and the Israelis say, oh, okay, this is suspect. But you cannot go to a court and tell a military court he prays Fajr or he prays Isha. Well, they suspect that he does something, but they have no evidence, and he might not even do anything in this regard. There are about 8,000 plus prisoners. With the 3,000, it should be around 10,000 right now. What Hamas' initial intention seems to be is to kill some of those soldiers and take a good number of them prisoners to exchange them. Because that's what they did with Shalit. They took a soldier by the name Shalit who, according to the Israeli army, they were told to kill their own soldiers if they are to fall prisoners in the hands of the Palestinians. Okay? So basically, Shalit defied the orders. The other groups with him were killed. So he went, ventured out of his tank, and he was captured. For 5 years, they could not locate him. And eventually, they exchanged him with 1,500 Palestinian prisoners. Among them is the head of the Al-Aqsa, Izzuddin Qassam al-Sinwar. He was among those who were released in that prisoner exchange. So in this regard, and it's the same thing, by the way, that they drive the Zionists crazy recently, is that after 50 days of war and bombardment and going through North Gaza from one corner to another corner, and they said, we surrounded, we are there, they could not secure a release of a single prisoner, not a single one. The lady that was released was in agreement with the family, don't bomb our house, we'll get you this out. And that's why they did not use, the term liberated on this and that. Said, she came to the Israeli, it was an agreement. And what added to them insult to injury is that the Qassam people handed to the Red Cross some of the prisoners where? In North Gaza. Because they saying, oh, we are in control of North Gaza. The prisoners are all in South in this regard. So this issue, prisoner, for the Israelis is this: they have the Hannibal doctrine, which is kill your own, don't let them come into being. Of course, they were thinking about one prisoner, 2, 3, 4. But what happened on October 7th, they ended up with more than 250. And this was not something that even the Hamas or the Zionists thought about. So the bulk of those Palestinian prisoners are there on very minor issues. But you could go there for a long time. Or you can be there for, one of the imams in our hometown, he was in administrative detention. His daughter was in administrative detention. And it took a long time, so eventually he decided to go on a hunger strike. He said, release my daughter or I will keep a hunger strike until my death. And they did release her. They did release her. Again, they have nothing. She's a journalist. If they have something, they will go to the court and get a guilty verdict. They don't. For the sake of time, inshallah, I'll stop here. And if there are questions or comments, inshallah, we have about 9 minutes. I'll just stop for the sake of time, inshallah. 9 minutes, questions, comments, correction, what have you. Yes? Oh, the role of Qatar. Yes, Jazakallah khair for the reminder. Qatar has played a major role in the negotiation between the US and the Taliban, between the US, the Israelis, and Hamas. between even some people that were associated with Al-Qaeda in the old days in Afghanistan. Saudis then and Qatar played a role. Qatar, by design, this is not that the Qataris have invented themselves or reinvented themselves. The role for Qatar that the US and the European have agreed to is Qatar will have good relationship with those people that are, not desired, being Islamist or what have you. And Qatar used this relationship with the Taliban. In fact, it was the US who asked Qatar to open an office for Taliban in Doha. The US told them, open an office for the Taliban. Although the US said the Taliban are the terrorists. And eventually they will sit with the Taliban in Qatar. They struck a deal in Qatar and everything Qatar. And of course, Qatar have the money, right? They could all the time, entice the Taliban or Hamas or what have you. In fact, for Hamas, they have been giving the so-called Minha Qatariya, the Qatari gift to the people of Gaza. Each month, this Qatari representative take suitcases full of cash, $100, and distribute them to the families in Gaza. So in this regard. So this Qatar role is not that the Qatar is an independent country and think for itself. No, this is the role for it. That's why when the Zionists attacked Qatar 3 weeks ago in Washington, D.C., and saying basically after this Hamas thing, Qatar would need to take a stand and this and that, Qatar responded to them. The embassy in Qatar, in Washington, D.C., said, it's the U.S. who asked us to open the offices for them. Case closed. Case closed. Now somebody will say the stand of the government of Qatar is way much better than those hypocrites in UAE and the Saudi government. Oh, no doubt about this. And Bahrain, there's no doubt about that. They have some honor, they have some, feeling for the Ummah and this and that. And that's why when the Saudis and the UAEs decided to invade Qatar and control it, Qatar could not trust neither the European nor the US to come to its help. So what they did? Turkey. They made a deal within 24 hours. The Turkish tanks were in Qatar saying, whoever wants to come, we'll deal with you. So even that the Qatar is serving the US and the Europeans in all of this, whenever there's a hostage situation in any of those countries, Qatar plays a role. Because that is what's the role of Qatar. The West, by the way, operate this way. So they do not close all the doors in front of you. They have a door that's open for you so they know what you are doing. They can control what you are doing. Either through Muhammad or Mahmoud, through a Mawlana or through a Sheikh or through a Tariqat Sufiya or what have you. They have a way to control. So Qatar is playing that role. Jazakallah khair for the reminder. Getting old, yeah, son, getting old. Any comment or question before we finish? Yes, Sahaj.
Regarding the sanction which U.S. placed in Iran, I was working for American company called Qatar. The sanction is actually a big lie. It's the biggest country selling corn and wheat and any product out of these two products to Iran is USA. The Iranian companies, they have like regional office in Dubai or Turkey or other locations, and they buy it, ship it to Bandar Abbas, bill it to Dubai or bill it to Turkey. The money goes through a Baraka Bank in Turkey with 4% more than the other prices in the world. The price of sugar, wheat price, you can add double price on that just to send it to the Iranian government from the American companies. The petrol of Iran was sold to the American agent through a Dubai agent with a 50% price. And I saw some invoices by my eyes that the price of the oil was 50% from the worldwide price sold out to the American companies.
The brother is saying that he works for a company in UAE, and he's saying that the US wheat and corn and other products are sold to Iran at an inflated price through the UAE companies. And that's absolutely Correct. In fact, what he added, which is also correct, that Iranian oil was being sold to the US through UAE for 50% discount. And the US, by the way, this is, you can see, this is the same trick they played with the Russia and Ukraine. So they said, we put the sanctions on Russia. Big hypocrites. Russian oil was going to Europe and the US. And they know it. And they know it. They just keep saying, we need to make a decision. We need to make a decision. And this decision does not come. And yes, true, they made life difficult for Iran by getting them out of the SWIFT system, which means the banks, they cannot transfer money. But how did they deal with it? They put fill trucks full of pure gold and drive from Iran to Istanbul and basically pay it in gold. And the US know it. And when the US told Turkey, they told them, mind your own business. Same thing with the Russians. They were selling oil to the US and to Europe being purified in refineries and resold, and all of it is Russian oil. Russian uranium. They have been buying Russian uranium and fueling their own reactors. So all this thing of sanctions is something, and let me close with this. And by the way, this is, it's ridiculous. It's difficult to believe, but it's true. One day, George Bush, the son, because of pressure from the evangelical Christians, he came out and imposed sanctions on Sudan. They said at the time Sudan is an Islamic government, although the US brought them to power, Omar al-Bashir and his company. It's a long story, but that's the bottom line. But so he imposed on Sudan those sanctions. So the New York Times have this headline, the US imposes sanctions on Sudan. Okay? You read the article from the beginning to the end, there's nothing. And then there's this statement, the US only import from Sudan the gum tree. And the last line in the article, that the US made exception that the sanctions will have exception that the US will still buy gum tree from Sudan. So basically the only thing that the US buy from Sudan is this gum tree. It looks like it's only grown in Sudan, and it comes into many things manufactured, including the gum, by the way, the gum itself. The ingredients come from Sudan. But the thing is, if you read the article and you do not read the details, the US put sanctions on Sudan. Life will be very difficult. And then they tell you, we only buy the gum tree. And by the way, they are exempted from the sanctions. This just tells you how they fool their own people. Jazakumullah khair, barakallah fikum, it's 9 o'clock, we have to end. We'll see you inshallah next Thursday. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bring the khair and the best to the Ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala take and put those Zionists where they belong in this life and the hereafter. Allahumma ameen. جزاكم الله خير وبارك الله فيكم سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد ان لا اله الا انت نستغفرك ونتوب اليك